Hello and welcome to the ECE 458 password safe web application demo. I'm going to show you the boilerplate, and after looking at that a little bit, I'm going to show you what a reference site looks like that's a fully implemented version. Of course, we're not going to go through the code or anything, but I'm just going to show you what it looks like from the user perspective so you can see kind of what the functionality is. So first, the boilerplate. So when you take a look at this, you'll see all these files, and the two files that you're going to need to modify are student.js and student.php. These are the two ones to implement. Everything else should stay the same. You want to make sure to look at the code in basically all of these files. There's a lot of useful things to understand about what's going on. But when you start to develop this, the first thing you want to do is to run it. Because it is a functioning web application, it just doesn't do anything right now. So to run it, we run this start script. And this calls the PHP development server, see here, and it runs a server on port 8000. And you see that it doesn't support HTTPS, and that's just because the development server doesn't support it, and we don't want you to have to worry about it. So what we say for this project is that we just pretend that there's HTTPS support, so don't worry about that. So now the server is running, so I'm going to flip over to my web browser and I'm going to load this. So this is what it looks like, but when I load the page, you see it sends me to this login, and I have this login page. The first thing I'm going to do actually is I'm going to open up the developer console in my web browser. So every web browser supports this. I'm using Firefox currently. The default here is to drop you to a JavaScript console. This is very useful. You can output logging to this. You can play with the JavaScript environment on the page. There's a debugger. There's memory. The thing we're going to look at right now is the network monitor, because this is very useful for seeing what's going on. So I'm going to reload the page so you can see that when you load the page initially, the JavaScript is sending a request to the server for this pre-flight resource. Now, of course, like all the other resources right now in the boilerplate, it doesn't do anything. But in the finished site, you might decide to have that do something. So the other thing I want to point out is that when you open up this network monitor, you might actually see a lot of other things. So if I click on all here, I see, oh, actually, there's HTML and JavaScript and CSS, all this stuff. If I filter it and I say XHR, okay, that gives me the ones that I want. These are the JavaScript requests to the server. Okay, so I have my network requests. I can also flip back over to my window where I started the server and see some logging. So most of this is just the development server itself telling me, oh yeah, it's serving some files, there's connections that were accepted and closed and so on. But I have some messages like this pre-flight OK, which were actually logged by my code. And this is from a function that students should use that's log to console, and this is going to output messages to this console. So it's very useful to see what's going on the server side when you're doing things on the client side. Okay, so what can we do? We can go to look for to sign up for a new account, and you see we loaded this page. Nothing happened in the requests, and the reason for that is this didn't actually send a request to the server. It didn't need to. This is a single page app, so for the most part, when we load a new page, we don't necessarily have to go to the server to load content. If we need to populate something like a dropdown, then we need to go to the server. But the HTML is pretty much already in memory on the browser. So here I'm just going to choose a username and say me, and password is something, and make it the same. Now, I've actually chosen, for example, to use a real email address here because the browser itself does a little bit of validation. So this is an email type field, so it's going to validate that I've actually put in something that looks like an email address. But of course, that doesn't guarantee that the server is going to get an email address, because it doesn't necessarily only get requests from this web page. I can hit sign up, and you see, okay, there's this sign up request that was sent to the server. Now, of course, because this is the boilerplate, there wasn't actually anything that happened, but it sent the request. So now I can log in, and I can say me1. It doesn't matter what I put in here, me123, because this isn't functioning, of course. And say login. Now, when I log in, you see there's two requests. There's an identify request and then a login request. And the identify request is going to just have the username passed, and then the server can pass back information that can then be used for the login request. There's three options in the dashboard, and here you can see it says dashboard 4, and then it's blank, and that's where the if everything was functioning, we would see the full name, hopefully, that I had put in when I signed up. But because this isn't doing anything, it doesn't fill it in. So I'm going to add a password. When I come to this page, there is a request to the server to populate this dropdown. It's the sites resource. Of course, doesn't do anything, and there's no sites anyway, so this doesn't have anything in it. I want to add a site, and here I want to say user, doesn't matter, and password, and I'm going to save the password. So you get this save request and then another sites request to populate dropdown. Again, of course, it doesn't do anything right now, but you see that you get these requests. If we go back to the dashboard, retrieve a password, get another sites request to populate this dropdown. If we had actually saved something, if the site worked, we would expect to see it in this dropdown. Selecting it then would populate these fields, and we would see the site, the user, and the password. And that password itself is the important part. So that's the part that the client is going to need to encrypt using the master password, which is the same password we used to log in. And then it's going to store it on the server and then retrieve it and decrypt it. Okay, then we can log out, of course. All right, so that's the boilerplate. Simple enough. Now I'm going to look at the reference version, so an implemented version of the site. It's going to look very similar, but this time it's going to actually do something. So I'm closing the developer console just to make sure I'm not giving anything away. Not that it should give too much away, but we just want to make sure everyone does their own work. So I'm going to switch over to reference version, and I'm going to start it. See, it looks the same. Now I'm going to reload over here. So looks the same, but this time it's actually going to work. So I'm going to sign up Bob, and Bob, I'll give him a password, something strong enough, and say bob.ca, and then Bob. Okay, so we created an account. Now if I tried to log in as Bob, but I gave the wrong password, it's going to say, oh, login attempt failed. So I need to make sure I'm giving the right password. And here now you can see, okay, I've gone to the dashboard and it's populated this with the full name that I gave, Bob. Now I can add a password. Let's say U Waterloo and Bob B. And let's give it a password. And I can save it. Save to save succeeded. So now you can see that it shows up in the dropdown. And if I select it, it actually populates the fields. Now it populates the password field. This isn't terribly important. You could choose not to do this, but you would have to detect which page you're on, so it's fine for it to be populated here. You should be able to modify things. So this here I can change the site user, for example, and it saves, and now if I reload it, it says, okay, Bob A instead of Bob B. If I go back to my dashboard, I can go to retrieve a password. The site shows up in this dropdown now, and I get my site data. So that was the password that I had originally put in. And I guess you'll just have to take my word for it that that was encrypted before it got sent to the server and decrypted when it came back. Finally, we can log out. And if I try to do something like go back, it's going to push me back to this login page because I'm not logged in anymore. Okay, so that is basically the functionality. And I think there's enough information between the project description and this demo that hopefully students should have a place to get started. So good luck, and I hope it's fun.